Welcome back to Obsession Engineering in the next instalment of our RS660 Super Twin build. The bike's been away for a couple of weeks because it's been having this lovely aluminium fuel tank made. So I suppose we'll have a better look at it. For the last couple of weeks, the bike's been over with Alan at Specialised Products because he's been making this bespoke, handmade aluminium fuel tank for us. For TT, we need more capacity than the standard plastic tank gives, and my plastic welding isn't good enough for holding petrol, and that's for sure. So we decided we needed a specialist. So this tank holds almost exactly the 20 litre capacity we're allowed for TT, and you can see we've got a bit under the seat, so it's going to get the weight further back. And because of that, we've actually been able to have the top of the tank slightly lower, so I can get tucked in even easier. We have got a filler cap to go on, but we're going to be mounting that up, but not actually fitting it finally until the tank's been painted. We have the vent off here because it obviously needs to breathe, and this is not a standard filler cap, so it seals properly. That sits above this. This is just going to have a little bit of rubber in a couple of places to sort of block it in, but there's rubber bits under here against the subframe, and it's mounted at the front on some rubber grommety bit, and it looks blooming lovely. And especially with the seat unit on, it's actually surprisingly small. For Alan to actually make the fuel tank, what he's had to do is he's had to make sort of a base to the tank that goes over the airbox, so that's sort of up under here and pretty much hollowed out, and then he's had to make the outer, and it's all been made bespoke by hand. But it turns out it's actually surprisingly awkward to do calculations on how much capacity all the bits take. And because you can't actually measure it with liquid in it until it's all welded together, to actually get a basic measurement, Alan used a technique that, I was not familiar with. What he did was he made sort of the outer skin and filled it with dog biscuits, which he then measured, and then he made the bit that goes over the airbox and filled that with dog biscuits and divided the two. And it turns out that his measurements are about 200ml difference in dog biscuit to water. So there's a technique I never thought I'd be using, measuring fuel tanks with dog biscuits. So we know this tank is pretty much dead on the capacity we're looking for. It will be getting painted, but isn't it blooming lovely? So while the bike's been away, the prep hasn't stopped. Ian over at Jolly's Carbon has done this lovely pre-preg carbon dash cover, so that's awesome and saves a little bit of weight. And then if I go down the far end of the bike, behind our lovely Arrow exhaust pipe is this lightweight rear disc. For me, a rear brake is for scrutineering and dire emergencies, so I don't use it very often, so we can afford to lose a little bit of weight off it. And this nice lightweight one is 400 grams lighter than the standard disc, and because it's rotating mass as well and unsprung, that makes a massive difference. So that is a really, really good mod. And now we have the bike back, the next thing to do is take out the standard suspension and fit something considerably better. To put the suspension in, I have moved to my workshop, so I'm no longer in the nice central heated secret control bunker, I'm in my normal workshop. And we're going to start by taking that standard shock absorber out and putting this lovely Bitubo XXZ fully adjustable, utterly bling, proper race spec shock in it, which will make a world of difference to how the bike rides. To actually be able to get the shock out, I have the bike on a set of footrest stands, so the back wheel is in the air. I have to take the little hugger off so I can actually get to the bolt that holds the shock in at that end. Then there's a bolt at that end, and this is about as easy as taking a shock out of a bike gets. So the new shock is in. It is a case of just supporting the back wheel and taking the bolt out of that end, the bolt out the top, take the old shock out, put the new one in. I have measured the length, and both shocks are set at 308mm, and that's with them in a shock stretcher, so they top out the top out spring, so that they're actually the right length. And that means my geometry at the back of the bike will be correct. This shock is adjustable for preload, and around the other side there is adjustments for high and low speed, compression and rebound, and there's a ride height adjuster at the top as well. So this is proper race spec and is actually the newer version of what I run on my BM, and it's awesome. The standard shock, on the other hand, is adjustable for preload, and there's a rebound adjuster in it. And when I rode this Eric standard bike on track, it's okay. I mean, on the road it's okay, but it is decidedly basic, so that is going to live in that box, I suspect, forever. The next job might take a little bit longer though, because now I need to take the forks out of the bike and take them up into my suspension area, ditch the standard internals and put my gas pressurised Bitubo internals in. So this will be a little bit more work because I need to get the front of the bike off the floor, so I'm going to have a headstock stand in there to raise the front up, and then it's calipers off, front wheel out, and undo the yoke clamps and slide everything out. But before I do that, I am going to take a static height measurement, sort of from, I'm going to mark a point on the bottom yoke, and then measure that down to the bench so that I know where the bike sort of sits naturally, so that when I put the new stuff in, I can get the geometry fairly similar, or at least I'll know how much I've changed it. I've found a design flaw that I'm surprised slipped through the net at Aprilia, and it is how this little front wheel speed sensor is routed, because the cable goes through this hole and up here and it's clipped into the back of the fork and kept out of the way. The only problem is when you want to take the fork leg out, you take that off and you think to yourself, well, it'll go through that hole. But it doesn't go through that hole. It very, very much doesn't go through that hole. I've tried it every which way you can. It doesn't fit. So you go, well, it's easy then, because you just disconnect it at the other end and pull the sort of connector from the loom down this way. And there's a problem with that as well, because, as with half the electrics on this bike, they're nestled in the clock bracket. So I've had to take the clock bracket apart again. It's not the end of the world, I've done it a few times, so it doesn't take me long now, but it is a bit of a faff to route the cable back out of there and down there. And shall we say, when I put it back together, we will be routing the cable differently. I can't really get away from the fact that the electrical connector for it is in here, but I can have the routing differently so I can take the fork out without having to feed the wire through. It was supposed to be nice and easy. This is just the little jobs that make you think, why? I've got the forks out of the bike now and I'm up in my suspension area, and these are the bits we're going to be fitting. These are the EBH pressurised cartridge kits from Bitubo. The springs are separate because I've actually bought the kits with no springs because I already had springs, but you can have the option of buying them just the dampers on their own and springs separate, but you don't get any tools. So this is ideal if you've got one bike already on the kits and you just want to build another bike up, or you can buy like a kit which is the cartridges, the springs and all the tools, so you can do spring changes and stuff. And that actually comes with extra springs as well, but I don't need that, so I've just got the cartridges here. But before I hit those, I have to take the standard stuff apart. The first thing I'm going to do with these forks is take the preload off them, because we don't want to be taking them apart with any more spring load on them than they need. They are in the vise, so I'm going to take the preload off, loosen the top caps, and then I'm going to go down the far end and up the hole up there. There is a sort of cap screw, and that holds the cartridge into the fork leg. So before I take it all apart, I'm going to get a wrench up there and I'm going to loosen that bolt a bit, because it's easier to loosen it now when everything's sort of got a bit of spring tension and has been held together than it can be when everything's loose inside. So moving along to my low fitted vise, which makes life easier for working on stuff at this height, now I can loosen this off completely. It is just cracked off, and drop the fork leg down and pour some of the oil away, and then all I'm going to do is literally buzz the bolt out the bottom of there and take the whole cartridge out as one complete item. Nice and easy. That's the standard cartridges in the sink. Both legs are now apart. This is the right hand leg. I'm going to start with the right hand leg, and the right hand leg is rebound damping. So the damping is separate. One leg does rebound, one leg does compression. It's absolutely fine that they're doing different things. It is pretty much standard through all sort of aftermarket forks and even some standard stuff now. So right hand leg is rebound, nice and easy to remember, and sort of assembling the new one is pretty similar to taking the standard stuff apart. I've got to put the new cartridge in, bolt it in the bottom, torque everything up, and then the important bits is setting the air gaps and such like. My rebound cartridge is now fitted, everything is torqued up, and this is a pressurised cartridge, so if I push it down, it comes back up on its own. The advantage to having a pressurised and thus sealed system is that the oil that does the damping doesn't mix with the oil in the leg, and it gives you a lot more consistency, and it's less prone to cavitate and that sort of stuff. So it is better having this system, and pretty much all the top end sort of suspension people are now doing cartridges that are pressurised. So that's in there. The next thing for me to do is set my air gap. Setting the air gap is fairly straightforward. I have an air gap setting tool, which is basically a big syringe, and on the other side of this is a bit that sticks out and is, adjustable to a specific measurement, so I get exactly the air gap I want. Because these cartridges are sealed, the oil that's in the leg is only really lubricating the seals and the bushes and setting the air gap. The air gap's important because it gives you some sort of spring effect towards the bottom end of the stroke. And you can make quite a lot of difference to how the bike behaves on the brakes and a little bit mid-corner with how big you have the air gap. So obviously if we have a big air gap, thus less oil, on the brakes it has less spring effect, so it won't be as stiff. And then if we have a small air gap, the bike, obviously when we're halfway down the travel, the spring effect from the air will come in and it makes it basically feel stiffer. On a race fork, this is quite a critical measurement, and it sort of goes in the combination of what spring you're running, what preload, and what air gap it is. So it is quite critical. I'm not going to tell you what I'm running because I don't want to give away all of my secrets, but I'm going to set my air gap so it's springs and spacers out and cartridge compressed to set the air gap. With the air gap set, the next thing to do is fit the spring. So the spring drops down here, and then we just put the preload spacer on, and then the top cap will go on top, and I will screw it down when I've got both hands free. Obviously, spring selection is critical. Bitubo gives us a setting point, a sort of a base setting for the springs and the preload they recommend, and they recommend a 9.5 spring. What I'm actually going to run with is a 9 spring in the left leg and a 10 spring in the right, which gives us a 9.5 average. But it means that if I want to change the spring rate quite a lot when I first ride the bike, I can just change one spring and it'll make a reasonably big difference. We always run the lighter spring on the left, so that if you do need to change them in a rush, lighter is on the left. And it is really common in racing to have different springs in each leg. The two forks are attached to the yokes and they're solid, so it's not like they're going to move separately, they move as one. So in effect you average out your spring rate. It's really quite simple. That's my top cap fitted with the spring preload spacer there and the spring down here. The idea of having this system where the spring is at the top and there's not a lot of space and stuff is that if you want to, you can change springs in pit lane. I've had to do it enough times that if I want to change a spring, I can change sort of one spring, or even if it comes to it, 2 springs in a bike within a couple of minutes. It really is quite quick, and it is designed to be done like this so it can be done in pit lane. Makes the job really simple. Also makes them nice and simple to work on the rest of the time. So all I've got to do now is slide that up, screw these together, and that's the rebound leg done. That's my rebound leg rebuilt, so that's all ready and can go back in the bike. I have still got to do the compression leg. These ones are especially easy to do. Trust me, there are plenty of bikes nowadays where you have to actually take the knuckle, the sort of fork bomb, off the stanchion to get the cartridges in, and they can be an absolute pain to do. So these are refreshing changes that they're nice and easy. You can't actually buy the cartridges without them coming through a service centre so they can be fitted properly and all set up. But I'm really, really pleased with how that one's gone. The other one should be just as easy. That's my pair of fork legs now with my Bling Bitubo cartridge in, ready to go back in the bike. Putting the fork legs in is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to slide them through the yokes, slide them through the clip-on clamps, make sure all the cables are routed the right side of everything, and then I can just snip this cable tie off that's holding all this in place and nip everything up. I am going to be setting them at a slightly different height though, because these cartridges aren't the standard length, so I'm going to set them to Bitubo's recommended standout, and then when I've got the bike on the floor I can remeasure everything and see if we've actually got somewhere near the standard geometry. So I've got the forks bolted in and I've got the standout set where I want it, but interestingly on these there isn't actually that much sort of fork leg that's the same diameter to get the clip-ons on, and these clip-ons from Spider are actually slightly thinner across the clamp there than most clip-ons. So these ones sort of fit quite snugly, but they are made specifically for this bike for that reason. But it does mean that you are slightly limited on the height alterations you can make on the front end of the bike. So we've got basically about a 12mm range we can work through, but I think that should be plenty. So that's the forks fitted. I have had it on the floor and I've measured the geometry point up to a set point on the yoke. They are a bit different to standard, but I don't want to go telling you what they are in case it doesn't work and then I look silly. So they're all fitted. The brake lines, which I don't think I've previously mentioned, these are held brake lines that we had custom made for us at B&C, and that's running from the master cylinder, and it splits across the top yoke, but high enough that if the mudguard or anything ever broke, it would never actually sort of take the unions out. And then I like to run my brake lines down the outside of the fork leg, just because I think it keeps it out of the way of the mudguard, and I just think it's a little bit neater. So they run down here, and I'm now running the sensor line for the front wheel speed sensor round the outside. I've also tagged the brake lines onto the fork legs with a little bit of sort of fuel pipe and a cable tie. Again, it just stops them moving around, stops them fretting and rubbing on the fork legs. We also, a little while ago, fitted a radiator guard, and when you're fitting a radiator guard, you don't want it flat, solid against the actual radiator. You want it spaced forward a little bit. So we actually made some little spaces into here, and we've foam mounted it as well. And the reason for this is if a stone hits it fairly hard and deforms the radiator guard, there's not a lot of point if it pushes straight into the radiator and still bursts the radiator. So with it moved forward a little bit, it lets a little bit of airflow between it, and if something hits the radiator guard nice and hard, it's not the thing that punches your radiator. My bling shock absorber is in, my bling forks are in, and the nice thing is I've got them set up so they're obviously pointing forwards because it looks nice, and they add to the black aesthetic of our spider top yoke and clip-ons a bit, so that looks really, really cool. Everything works really, really well. It's actually the first time I'll use these EBH cartridges. They're a evolution of the ECHs that I've got on my BMW, and they're mega, so I'm really looking forward to riding around on that. This is it. We are not that far away from actually taking it to a racetrack and having a ride around. But of course there is a few little bits that still need to be done. I'm back in the secret control bunker today, and I'm getting on with a few little jobs because it's not actually very long before we're going testing, so it's kind of important to actually put the bike together. One of the things we have done so far is fit the steering damper, so let's go and have a bit of a look. So there it is hanging down there. It's a Bitubo gas pressurised steering damper, and we have a little bracket that we've made sort of up the back of here that is awkward to point to. So I've made that myself in the workshop, and that bolts into some holes on the frame that are actually already drilled and tapped but not used, almost as if Aprilia actually expect people to fit a steering damper there. But there isn't a sort of, standardised bracket for them yet. There's several different people making them, but I've made mine bespoke so I know it's going to fit. One of the important things when you're fitting a steering damper is to make sure that when you put it in lock, both ends, that the steering damper is sort of free to move on its spherical joint, because if it goes tight anywhere, that's when it pulls against the seals and they tend to leak then. So always make sure you do that when you're fitting a damper. So that's one bit that's done. The next bit's up the back of the bike. So this has been in shop before, and this is the support for our race seat. And underneath that you probably can't see because it's not very light under there, is our rapid bike module and our battery. And even with the sort of the section of our big fuel tank that runs under here, there's just enough room to fit everything underneath here and above all this stuff. So that's all pretty good. But we did have to cut the original brace off that goes across here. So this is the brace that we're going to be using when we use the standard fuel tank, because for most of our short circuit use we don't want to use our expensive TT tank because we don't want to damage it. So that's that fitted. I've routed some cabling sort of out the way down here, tidy that up as much as I can. That's for the fuel pump. So that's the bits under the seat. The next thing I really need to do is fit the second set of bodywork. This is our race seat unit that we're going to be using, and I think it looks super because it's proper GP bike-esque. So this wasn't actually made specifically for our RS660, this was actually made for a different in-between project somebody had a few years ago, but I think it looks cool, it should be quite good for aerodynamics, and more importantly, it actually fits. It's actually a pretty good fit around the frame and bit, but obviously it doesn't fit exactly around our tank, so I've got a little bit more trimming to do on this one to make it just look a little bit tidier. And these big areas here, which would normally be covered up, we've actually got some carbon panels from Jolly's Carbon that we're going to be just modding a little bit so we can fit over this and cover it all up, because we don't want all that lot flapping around in the breeze. What I have to do next though is make our other seat unit, which is the same as this, fit the same as this one, so that we can interchange them. And one of them we have actually got to like trim a bit out the back here to fit with the big TT tank. So that's the project next, is I'm going to take this one off, offer the next one up, and see where I need to tweak it. There's a reason I've started to do the seat unit before the rest of the bodywork, and that's because it's the easy bit. So the only thing I really need to modify is I need to trim a little bit off here, because obviously it sits against the tank up here. So I've just drawn a line with my felt pen, so I'm going to take it off, get a Dremel on the go with a little cutting disc, trim these bits off, try and make it look reasonably tidy, and then I'll do another trial fit and make sure it all sits where it should do. Then the really entertaining thing, of course, will be drilling the holes in here that go to our plate, because when we did this with the first seat unit, we drilled the holes in the seat first and then marked them on the aluminium plate underneath. So what I'll actually do for the first one is measure back from the front, if that makes sense, measure backwards from the front of the seat, find the point I need to drill the first hole, and then work from there to work out where the others are, because obviously I can't get underneath it because it's all solid under tray. So relatively simple, with just a hint of awkwardness thrown in for good measure. So I've had the Dremel out, or at least the budget equivalent of a Dremel, and I've trimmed off these extra bits here, so the line of the tank and the line of the seat unit are somewhere near. They will get tied up a little bit later, and then I moved on to drilling a hole. So I started off by drilling just one, because what I don't want to do is drill all 3 holes and find they're all out of position. So I measured twice and cut once, and I actually probably measured 4 times and cut once, and my hole is, pretty close. There's always a little bit of movement on the fiberglass anyway, so it's not the end of the world. The joint line down there isn't in the centre of the seat unit, but my hole does line up with the hole in the sort of seat support thing. So now from that hole I'll measure backwards to sort of the position where the other bolts will go, and hopefully it won't look like Swiss cheese when I've finished. That's all 3 holes marked and drilled, and actually, even more miraculously, in the right place the first time. Yes, the line there is straight and that bolt isn't in line with that one, but it's fairly close, and that fits with the bracket underneath, and I'm going to be sat on it, so I won't be able to see it, which will calm my OCD down. Right, we are also having one bolt going up into the bottom of here, just to make that a little bit more solid. So I've just got to mark that one and drill it, and then take the seat back off, just tidy up around the edges and bits to make it a little bit smoother everywhere, and then that's that seat unit, good to go. Now that I'm happy with the seat unit and bits at the back of the bike all fits correctly, the next thing I need to do is start making the spare set of fairing for the front of the bike fit, which I kind of guess means I'm going to have to show you what we're fitting. This is very definitely not RS660 fairing, and there is a reason for this. Partly, me and Robert, we didn't actually want the bike to look like every other RS660, and there's also a bit of a function of the RS660 fairing, especially the front fairing, is really quite small and quite low, and I'm quite big and my shoulders have a tendency to hang out in the breeze. So we wanted something a little bit bigger, a bit more race bikey. So what we managed to find is a set of Kalex type Moto 2 fairings, and when we first came up with the idea, we weren't really sure if they'd fit properly, which is kind of why I didn't record the first fitting of them in case they were an utter disaster. But it turns out they actually fit surprisingly well. So what I need to do now is mount the screen into the top fairing, copy the holes off the other fairing that we've already fitted onto these ones, drill our holes for all the Zeus fasteners and bits, and there are a few bits we have to trim out to fit just round at a few little bits of the bike. So again, it's going to be measuring, dremeling, and quite a lot of offering up. It's going to be a terribly exciting afternoon. So the black panels here are the first set of bodywork we actually got hold of, and they've all been on the bike and drilled and fitted and all the rest of it. So the holes up here are where the side panel Zeus fasteners up onto the nose cone, and then this little hole down here is where it actually fits onto the side of the bike, which is actually onto this bracket here, which is actually the standard fairing panel fitting position, just extended out a little bit. So what I'm going to do first is offer up the side panel to our new top fairing, mark through the holes, drill the panels onto here, and hopefully when I've finished, all the panels will be interchangeable. So if I damage a left-hand side panel from one kit, in theory I can use the left-hand panel from the other kit because it should fit, or at least I hope it will do. So we're going to drill all the Zeus faster bits first, and then we'll move on to where it actually fits onto the bike. So having used the old panels, or the first set of panels, to mark holes in the top fairing and in the side panel, and then I sort of overlaid one set of panels with the new set, and so I can mark where the holes are going to go for the side mounting bits and things. Then, with all those bits done, I've also marked out bits that we need to trim off that we don't need, so down there and down in that bottom corner, because that gets a bit close to footrests. But then we move on to the belly pan, which is a little bit more of a game. Because the belly pan actually sits quite a long way off the bottom of the engine and off the exhaust parts and bits, we decided that we'd sort of shuffle everything up a little bit to give us a bit more ground clearance, so that when we rattle through the bottom of Ray Hill, we're definitely not going to be wearing the belly pan out. To do that, in effect, that's where the line where the sort of top fairing would normally have fitted, and ours fits about 15mm deeper, so we've raised the whole belly pan up 15mm. But that means, of course, that I have to trim a bit off here first, and then need to get the mounting holes further down. So doing the belly pan is going to be a little bit more work, especially as there is a bit of a corner chopped out of it as well. So it is a bit more work, but it will be worth it. First fairing fitting is going fairly well, other than the fact we're on the first version of the belly pan, on the black belly pan. So that's Zeus clipped to the side panel. The side panel is bolted to the bike, and it's just bolted together to the top fairing up here, so that we can work out where we need the holes to go through here. And to find those, what we've actually done is shone a torch up through the bolt hole in the back, and that's, because the fairing's fairly thin, has shone through the fiberglass, and we can see where we need to be. So we've marked them on both sides, and then because they look uneven, I've measured across and they are actually pretty good. It's these sort of seam lines that are uneven and throwing the job out, so that's actually looking pretty good. So the next thing to do is drill these, then I'm going to modify the belly pan, cut out the bits that sort of miss around our levers and bits, and then the white set can go away for paint while we're using the black set. The second set of fairing is now actually fitting. All the bolts are in, well, barring a couple of the Zeus clips or whatever, but all the main fasteners are in that actually attach it to the bike. We have still got to fit the screen in it, which won't take me too long. Those bolts are in, the sort of side panel bolts, the belly pan bolts are in as well. There's a bit trimmed out of there where the exhaust actually just sticks through, but it is more than 50mm from the bottom of the fairing, so it fits ACU regs. There's bits trimmed out where the levers push, so we're looking pretty good. We've just got to whip it all off, give a few little bits a bit of a fettle, so they're a little bit nicer, fit the screen in it, and then it can go for paint. But all in, I think that's looking pretty darn good. Has taken a while though, being as it's now very much dark outside, but it is a good day's progress. Final day of main prep before the bike actually goes to circuit, and it's been a little bit chaotic, so I've not had the camera on because we just needed to get cracking on with stuff. But there are a few little bits we've done. The rain light, which sort of nestles under here, in fact is sitting just there, that is now connected, so if I turn the ignition on, we have a switch under the seat just there, which is nice and subtle. So that's the rain light on and off. And for anybody who whinges about regulations, it says the rider must be able to turn the switch on and off while sat on the bike. It doesn't say anything about the switch having to be on the handlebars. So there you go. Right, turn that off. Ignore the service light on that. It's not a problem at this stage. The rapid bike wiring and bits is tucked out the way. The rain light wiring is nice and small, and we've tied up a bit of the wiring under there. The engine has had oil and filter change, and we've lock wired the filler and the sump plug and all that sort of stuff, so that's nice and ready to race. Down to the front of the bike, you may notice the fairing is on it, and in here there is some bits of plate, sort of bits of tin put in that we've shaped so the air sort of comes through our front air scoop and then ducts down and into the original air skip, so there's been a little bit of modding going on in there, which you can't really see very well because it's obviously in the shadows, and the bits of tin may be getting changed for carbon at some stage. Right, yes, the other thing, we now have tyres fitted. When we start racing it, and especially when the weather's a little bit warmer, we will be on the 213 Dunlops, but because the weather's a little bit cold for the first tests, I've decided to go with these are the Sport Smart TTs because they're track data and they're designed to work in cooler temperatures, and because the bike's quite light, it won't generate as much tyre temperature. So I've decided to go with sort of a safe option, and until we're down to the last second or so in the lap time, these are going to be absolutely fine. So for testing, they're going to be great. They are the same sizes as the 213s we'll use later, so the geometry will be right. Right, what else is there? We've got to put the seat unit on next. We're not going to have time to put the little trim panels on here, but we're not looking too bad, which is convenient because it's not very long until we're going to ride it. So today's actually been quite an important day in the Super Twin project because it is actually ready to ride. There is a small list of little tidy up items to do, including some paint and that sort of thing, but the bike is actually ready for me to go and start testing on. The other thing that's happened today, which is quite important, is Robert's having to hold the camera because the CF Moto that we campaigned before, that went today to its new owner and will also be at TT. So look out for number 50, that's F-in-O-in on the CF Moto, and this will be number 36 as we set off down Glen Crutchery Road in a few weeks. But before that, we've got to go testing, so next week I'm on track with it, and I can't wait. Thank you for watching. If you could like and subscribe, that would be excellent. Join us again next time when we're taking the little 660 for its track debut. And if you'd like to buy any of the stuff you've seen on the video, you can check out obsessionengineering.co.uk.